Hi, I'm Ryan Smansky, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial, and today we're going to talk about what it means to be a fleet flagship. Specifically, some ships are set up to be like that, and others are not. And we received a question recently about what makes the ships that are set up like that special. Specifically, Battleship Iowa is different from the other three Iowa class battleships. We are on the 03 level right now, which is the Admirals flag bridge. All four Iowa class battleships were set up to be flagships and have a flag bridge like this. However, Iowa was also set up to be a fleet flagship, and what that meant, the major difference that she had over her sister ships, was the conning tower right here. The 04 level up above, where the helm is, where the captain commands in battle, and the 05 level with spot 3, the tertiary main battery fire control director, are armored with up to 17.3 inches of armor plate. And here you can see this stripe right here, which is the armored floor of the 04 level conning tower above us. That looks like about 4 inches. The level down here on the flag bridge is not armored. It's only thick enough to support the weight of the conning tower above it. And this is about 600 tons of armor plate on these two levels above us. So this is also largely inaccessible. There is a door here. You can go in there. It's where the electro-hydraulic motors are that control the opening mechanism for the bank vault doors above. They're about 2 tons each. So that's primarily what we have in here. On Iowa, however, if you open this up, the interior is a fully armored space. That adds extra weight. So sometimes that means you've got to remove something. Not really on Iowa. The major difference between Iowa and the other Iowa class battleships are, with a conning tower here that you can enter, there are view slits on the forward face, which was an issue because the Iowa class battleships had a 40mm gun on top of turret 2, which obstructed the view from this conning tower. So Iowa only ever had 19 quad 40s, whereas her sister ships all had 20, because that turret top 40mm gun was removed and replaced with a gun tub with 3 20mm guns in it instead. And those are significantly lower, and the shielding for that did not obstruct the Admiral's view. And so that's what was done. Iowa was not the only fleet flagship. Prior to her, USS South Dakota was built as a fleet flagship. Built under treaty restrictions, adding the extra roughly 300 tons of armor to armor a third level of the conning tower for an admiral, meant that they had to save weight elsewhere. The Iowas, by the time this was happening, didn't really worry about that. So South Dakota lost her 2 middle twin 5-inch guns. So she only had 16 5-inch 38s in 8 twin mounts instead of the 10 that all the other fast battleships had. In theory, by the time she's completed, there's a war going on and they didn't have to worry about that. Battleships do have a reserve of buoyancy. I suspect some of the magazine spaces that were switched over were turned into flag accommodation spaces. A flagship is going to have a larger crew than a standard ship because the Admiral doesn't just come on alone. He's got a whole big staff that comes on with him. So you need a ton of extra officers' accommodations for them. We've filmed videos on both Battleship Alabama and Battleship Massachusetts, which are sister ships of South Dakota. They're linked in the description below. If you ever get the chance to visit them, be sure to do it. They are very, very compressed ships, especially in the superstructure. To save weight on armor, they made the citadel as short as possible. That's the space from the front of the forward turret to the back of the aft turret. So there was a much smaller space between turret 2 and turret 3 in which to build the superstructure. And so that ends up being extremely compressed. which meant there wasn't a whole heck of a lot of room in there for extra accommodations. And I suspect they ended up having to double up in those staterooms whenever she was used as a flagship, and I suspect that wasn't ideal, which is why then a single class later, they built a second fleet flagship. That could also be because the US doctrine changed, and instead of having one battle force, we had switched to having the Two Ocean Navy Act, which then said we were going to have both an Atlantic and a Pacific fleet. So maybe it's we need two flagships, maybe it's South Dakota isn't acceptable. You don't really hear about South Dakota being used as a flagship during World War II, whereas the Iowa class battleships always are, and they aren't even set up for it with the exception of Iowa. In fact, at the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, Admiral Lee uses Washington as his flagship instead of South Dakota, which actually has an armored conning tower for him. Prior to this, the US Navy's fleet flagship was the battleship Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania differed from her sister ship Arizona in that she had an extra layer of armored conning tower. And so she was Admiral Pye's flagship during the attack on Pearl Harbor. Admiral Pye was in command of Battle Force, which was the battle line of the Pacific Fleet. And this meant that other ships had to be flagships. For example, Arizona was the flagship of Battleship Division 1, Admiral Isaac Kidd's flagship, because Pennsylvania was the Force flagship. Now, that brings us back to Iowa and her interesting World War II story. Iowa doesn't really serve as a fleet flagship. Why is that? Because Iowa has such nice flag accommodations, it seems like people like Admiral Oscar Badger, who was in command of Battleship Division 7, decided to make her their flagship of the division, which meant when Spruance decided he wanted to put his flag on a battleship, that ship wasn't available, but which one was? New Jersey. Specifically because she wasn't set up as a fleet flagship, didn't have quite as nice of flag accommodations, she hadn't been claimed yet. So when Spruance is transferring his flag around, and then a couple months later when Halsey is transferring his flag around, New Jersey has empty flag spaces, so they both end up picking this ship. So there are a bunch of flagships in a fleet. A group of battleships will be put together in a division and they'll have a flagship. That's Iowa in command of Battleship Division 7, which was Iowa and New Jersey. Then that division and a number of cruiser and destroyer divisions and maybe some carriers will be put together in a task group. And they'll be put together in a task force. And then all of these task forces will be put together in a fleet, say Halsey's 3rd Fleet. So each of these organizations has a flagship with an admiral and a staff on board. So the division admiral is going to be like a lower half rear admiral with a couple of guys in his flag staff, and then the task force might have an upper half rear admiral with a slightly more guys, and then you get up to the fleet flagship where you've got a full 3 or 4 star admiral with a huge staff, and they're commanding all these admirals under them with their various organizations. The United States isn't the only country that does this. For example, Jellicoe's flagship at the Battle of Jutland, HMS Iron Duke, was set up to be a fleet flagship. She had additional fleet modifications, and as you're going through your battleship history books, you might find a whole laundry list of other ships that fit this classification. Honestly, I never thought about it until this question was asked. Like, I knew it was a thing that was out there, and I knew a couple of ships were set up, and I'm sure there are other ships besides Pennsylvania, which was the interwar fleet flagship, and then South Dakota and Iowa that fit these qualifications. I'm just not 100% sure. There are some other ships. If you find any, let us know in the comment section down below. Battleships, of course, are large enough that they're almost always have the room to be turned into a flagship if necessary. Oh, before I sign out, winter has sprung here in Camden, New Jersey. It is currently snowing, and I am happy to say that we have some new inventory in the store. This is the Battleship New Jersey hoodie. Model it for you there for a second. It is the softest thing I've ever worn. It's like wearing a baby lamb. There's a link in the description below if you're interested in buying one of these yourself. Any purchases you make in the ship store go 100% back into maintaining Battleship New Jersey, so we really appreciate your support there. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals. We really appreciate your donations, and there's a link in the description below where you can continue to support us. There's the link to the store so you can support us and get Battleship merch so you can also advertise for us. And, of course, you can always support the museum by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about us and our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.